Lazarus, the show I was looking forward to the most this season, is finally here, and it looked inconsistent? Fine, it looked good, of course it did, it had to, but at the same time, the first episode was home to a surprisingly large amount of jank / animation inconsistencies / lack of overall polish. Of course, we'll go through the specifics in a bit. Point is, Lazarus episode 1 wasn't the flawless visual masterpiece some thought it would be. Let's break down the visuals, make sure to subscribe. Now, as always, let's go through the stuff first. Lazarus is directed by the legendary Shinichiro Watanabe, the man behind Cowboy Bebop, Carol and Tuesday, Terror in Resonance, and more. Besides just being really good at what he does at a technical level, Watanabe is fantastic at creating an all-around vibe, be it the spacefaring Cowboy Bebop or Terror in Resonance's literally just Japan. His ability to craft a general vibe is unmatched, and Lazarus is no different. I'll go into detail in a bit. For Lazarus, Watanabe was given complete control of the production. Adult Swim simply wanted something quote-unquote serious, and besides that, Watanabe was allowed to do whatever he wanted, which is great. Chad Stahelski, hope I'm pronouncing it right, I'm probably not, is credited as the action supervisor. Chad is best known for directing the John Wick series starring Keanu Reeves, which yes, is insane. Chad has also worked as a stunt coordinator on several major Hollywood flicks. Spider-Man, Iron Man, The Matrix, 300, you name it. When it comes to animation, however, his experience is quite limited. He was the action director for episode 13 of Ninja Kamui, and that's it. That and Lazarus. This, however, shouldn't be a problem because he isn't actually involved with the pen on paper part of the production. In an interview, Watanabe clarified what the action supervisor credit means. For Lazarus, Chad and his team did what they do best. They filmed a bunch of live action footage to serve as the action blueprint, much like Hollywood projects. The animators then drew each frame based on this footage. I won't dive deep into Chad's contribution here because he wasn't actually involved with the first episode. Chad and his team joined this project from episode 2 onwards. The storyboards for this episode were handled by 4 people. The opening scene was storyboarded by the one and only Shingo Yamashita. Animators Hiromitsu Seki and Gosei Oda storyboarded the action scenes, the 2 chase scenes, while Watanabe himself storyboarded the rest. Over on the animation side of things, this episode was quite stacked. You had the aforementioned Hiromitsu Seki and Gosei Oda, 2 incredible animators. You had Takashi Kojima, you had the legend himself Shinya Ohira, and more. It was a stacked episode. As for the more uncomfortable stuff, this episode did feature a large second key animator army, which is just the mappa way at this point. I don't know why some of you try to normalize shit like this, but that's its own conversation. To be fair though, based on what I've heard, this project was being worked on for a while, so I doubt it'll fall apart at any point. Alright, that's enough rambling, let's go through this episode. This opening scene was its own isolated work. It had its own team, and the people who worked on this scene were credited separately. The scene was directed, storyboarded, and corrected by Shingo Yamashita. The really pretty looking openings man, the funny pain face man, the webgen man, he goes by many names. Those are all real names, by the way. I definitely did not come up with them just now because I thought they sounded funny. This entire scene just straight up looked like a Yamashita OP. The overlays, the timing of the cuts, the distinct style of lighting and compositing, it had it all. Animation wise, it was extremely competent, and it had to be. This tiny, less than a minute long sequence featured 8 different key animators, including major names like Takashi Kojima and my own. Of course it looked good. This eye close-up looked absolutely insane, the drawing was phenomenal, and the textured reflection on the pupil looked stunning. The photography work throughout this section looked clean, by the way. Nearly every shot featured heavy overlays, but all of it just worked. Some cool looking character acting here, followed by the best sequence from this episode in terms of pure animation. These 3 cuts looked absolutely insane. The animation was so consistent. The volume control was out of this world. This cut in particular was insanely good. The body language was flawlessly animated. You can feel the weight of his body as he collapses. You can see his head snap back from the force of his body hitting the floor. It's so good. I do wish I could see the actual lines though. The character cell was heavily obscured due to the visual style this scene was going for. I believe this section was either animated by my own or by Takashi Kojima, possibly both. This shortcut looked amazing as well. Again, the body language looked so lively, almost to an uncanny degree. Such an amazing sequence. And with that, we have reached the actual episode. Again, that Yamashita scene was its own isolated work. Before we talk about the animation, however, let's go over a few general things. The art direction and compositing in this show can be hit or miss. The prison scenes near the start, for example, look a bit unnatural and drab. The diffusion and the subtle greenish hue looks off. I guess it works given the tone of the setting, but visually speaking, it's not the most appealing thing in the world. The scenes near the end, however, were really well processed. The warmer tones looked great. Storyboard-wise, Watanabe did a fantastic job as expected. A lot of planning went into each shot. Every single cut looked dynamic. They used a bunch of multi-layered, occasionally 3D edited background pans, which made the more limited scenes more fun to look at. The hypothetical camera never stopped moving. Let's go through a few examples. This shot features two background layers. The windows are 3D and the model is actually rotating, while the super background, the part further away from the camera, is an illustration being dragged across the screen. The character cell shifts accordingly. This shot features two layers, the main background and the railing at the bottom left corner. These two layers move at different speeds, leading to a dynamic parallax effect. This shot featured a cool high-angle camera pan made possible by a 3D background, while this shot featured a couple of 3D desks while the rest of the background was an illustration. This made this long static scene fun to look at. You get my point, right? Watanabe kept doing cool shit with the camera. I think that's the best way of describing it. Let's now talk about the action, aka the start of the episode. The prison escape scene was probably storyboarded by Hiromitsu Seki and it looked great for the most part. The movement throughout this section felt so alive, if that makes sense. The body language was realistic and the choreography was top notch. Also loved the way they animated the folds of the fabric. This opening sequence is a bit choppy. The movement wasn't compromised, but a slight bit of stiffness could be seen. This cut, for example, Alex flipping and dropping his knee looks too jumpy. The space between the poses is too large. An extra frame or two could have helped. Still, the action was very ambitious. The movement didn't hide behind close-ups and the character actions were varied with lots of complicated acrobatics and poses. That stuff is extremely difficult to animate. Also, the timing was quite good. Love the subtle ease in when Alex runs towards the camera. It makes the action feel more snappy because he speeds up as he gets closer. Look how complicated this shot is. The unorthodox composition of the background, the scaling shift as Alex climbs up and gets closer to the camera, the meticulously drawn, physically accurate climbing animation. You don't usually see stuff like this in anime. Love the acrobatics here, it's so cool. Also, the transfer of energy between these two shots is perfect. The build-up from the flip is paid off via the snap of this guy being thrown overhead. The next minute or so is animated by Hiromitsu Seki, and it features some of the most polished movement from this episode. It's the small stuff. The lively head and shoulder movement here, the bounce in this guy's running animation, the line consistency, it was so good. The animation did justice to the meticulously laid out action storyboards. Speaking of which, the action storyboards were meticulously laid out. The action made sense, the environment was utilized wonderfully, the flow and timing were on point, the shots were dynamic and fun to look at. I sound like a broken record, I know, but it was so good, all of it. This well-drawn, smoothly animated low-angle shot looked phenomenal. The fisheye effect on the background in this shot made it so much more fun to look at. The perspective work and timing in this cut looked amazing. It was a great sequence all around, in case you couldn't tell. The episode, however, wasn't perfect. You could spot some melt if you knew what to look for, you could find drawings that lacked polish, you could see some stiffness in the movement here and there. It's nothing major, but stuff like this being the norm for practically every modern production, even major ones like Lazarus, is depressing to say the least. Anyway, the second major action sequence, another chase scene by the way, was up next and it was grander given the setting and more bouncy. I think this scene was storyboarded by Gosei Oda because some of his animation philosophies were present throughout this sequence, be it the exaggerated perspectives or the bouncy movement. As per usual, the storyboards were meticulously crafted and the scenes looked fluid and featured full body animation. This kick looked so satisfying, the weight distribution as Alex's body goes down and the snap of his leg looked amazing. As always, it's the small stuff. The way Alex loses his balance for a second after landing, the way he covers his face as he leaves the shaded area. Animating stuff like this requires an immense amount of skill and effort. The movement from this point on was so Gosei Oda built that I think most of this section was animated by him. This running animation, for example, looked so bouncy and Alex changing his stride while jumping felt so natural. Also, absolutely loved the shapes here. The blocky, slightly foreshortened style of animation looked incredible. This was such a complex shot, it's a first-person view of a forward roll. Try picturing that in your head, a first-person view of this action. animation. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Now think of how difficult it must have been to animate. By the way, Alex's shadow is also hand animated because this shot wasn't complex enough already. Even the simple stuff like this bit of character acting was extremely well animated. Not all of it was perfect, of course, given the sheer number of moving elements and the complexity of the storyboards. A shot or two looking awkward isn't really a surprise. If I'm not mistaken, this entire section was animated by Gosei Oda. These stretchy perspectives look like his work. Loved the use of 3D backgrounds to convey speed and distance, by the way. This episode did a lot of that. The stretched out, foreshortened, lanky drawings here also helped convey space and distance. This bit of running animation, just like every other scene from this section, had that extra bit of bounce. Look at the movement of the shoulders and the hair. You can see the extra bit of effort. More natural, bouncy full body movement followed, and finally, after all of that, we got a short segment animated by Shinya Ohira, and by his standards, it wasn't really much of anything, just some basic abstract effects. Although any new Ohira is good Ohira, basic sequence or not. And that was the episode. Not quite the bombastic, flawless display of sakuga some thought it would be, but great regardless. I personally can't help but be enamored of lifelike full-body mechanics, and this episode featured tons of it. Also, the quality of action should step up a notch moving forward because, like I said near the start, Chad Stahelski and his team started working on this show from episode 2 onwards. I'm really excited to see what he cooks up. Somewhat unrelated, but I decided to cover the first episode of Lazarus instead of Yaiba, despite the fact that in terms of both animation power and overall consistency, the latter was superior because while Yaiba features more animation muscle, Lazarus features the style of direction and animation that I prefer. Of course, I will talk about Yaiba at some point. And that's about it. Like the video? Check out this other bit of content on screen, like and subscribe, and until next time.